Chapter 12. The Coming of the Spring. So much came to Elof in his vision, and many things else, both near and far. Perhaps among them he saw also what passed beneath him, as he drifted among the uppermost reaches of the airs. But for an account of that, whatever its origin, the chronicles must answer. Awesome as were the forces he had unleashed, the armies gathered among the hills had escaped them. The Charismen, almost a league away to the north and westward, were well sheltered by the intervening hills. But it seems that the light in the sky and the terrible blast that followed were too much for them. They were brave men, but they had fought too long and hard against forces they scarcely understood. Almost to a man they took to their heels, and those few captains who sought to restrain them were borne along in the rush. And in the end, that was as well, for they were not cut off from their homes and kin by the rising waters. The men of Morvenhall might have been less fortunate, had they not heeded Elof's warning and been crouched down behind the shield wall. Those among the Duergar wise in such arcane matters believed that the shields had mirrored more than light that day, for it was certain that such strange metals as were bound within that hammer could unleash 100 unseen deaths if ill handled. But none who were there, save perhaps Ilse and her folk, guessed anything of this. It is told in the chronicles that even as the roar and thunder of the riven land abated, and the earth grew still again, the first gusts blew of a mighty gale that scoured the smoke and dust from the air, and for a few minutes left the skies clear. Then the bravest among them ventured to peer shakily over their shield rims, marveling at the catastrophe that had occurred, and even more at their own preservation. And as they gathered courage and stood up upon shaky limbs, humbled and fragile in the face of so vast an event, they saw that outside the shelter of the shields, the snow and frost had been scorched from the hillside, and withered grasses were steaming in the sun. Their wonder grew when they perceived that all around them, upon every hill as far as the eye could reach, even beyond the possible reach of that blast, it was the same. The cloud that had maintained that wintry landscape was gone, blown apart and dispersed. And so no less was the will that had created it. Only then, with a shaky lift in their hearts, did they begin to understand. One of the first afoot was Kermorven, and though he was as awed as any by the spectacle of such utter devastation, he turned at once to see that his people were safe. He helped Ilse up, her wounded leg stiff beneath her, and kept her hand clasped tight in his own as he gazed around that shattered scene. And he it was who first voiced the hesitant hope that was slowly swelling to a certainty in all their minds. "A great change has come upon the world," he cried, his clear voice carried upon the wind. "The balance is turned back. The power of the ice is swept away." And down that wind, as though in answer, as if he had heard those words, or perceived them in his vision, came Elof. Spiraling from the sky, he fell like a moth from a candle flame, whirling and tumbling like one of his own plumes upon ruined and smoldering wings. They saw him at once by the trail of smoke he left. Down over their heads he glided, black against the red of the sinking sun, and crashed onto the hillside above in a sprawl of limbs. Up the hill they streamed after him, his friends to the fore, though they dreaded what they were sure they would find. But some long strides away, Rock, who was first, stopped, hesitated, whispered, "Is that him?" For the man who lay upon the scorched grass, arms and legs outflung, had skin darkened to the hue of old bronze, and hair of purest white. "Ah," breathed Ills, her voice choked and hoarse. "He might almost be that Watcher. Fool! Of course it's him. But living?" As if hearing her somehow, the man stirred, moving his legs slowly, and Ills cried out. Beneath them, silver gleamed against the black ground, and a slow trickle of blood ran from the rags of his clothes. Forgetting her own pains, she hastened to tend him, and found, when she did so, that the anklets set in his legs had shattered, violently as it seemed, and the fragments were gradually working loose from his wounds. "He lives, then. But what more?" demanded Kermorven, returning with men bearing a shield lined with blankets, and bending over the anxious knot of figures. The gale was blowing ever more strongly from the south, a warm wind rich with the promise of rain, and heavy clouds were rising over the southward hills. "Will he awaken?" Ills looked up at him, her huge dark eyes troubled. "The wounds to his legs are healing already. His burns, not so. But we have salved them. But as to wakening, well..." The first shadows of the night touched the hillside, and she sighed. Above the noise of the torrents, a distant rumble sounded in the sky. "His eyes are open, as they were from the first. I think he has heard all we said to him, but he does not seem to understand. It is as if he looks elsewhere, at things we cannot see, and we are not real to him." "He has flown too close to the sun," said a deep voice quietly from behind them. "That man may not do, and yet live." Kermorven jerked upright. An awful chill had lanced through him at the very sound of that voice, and he knew at once whose it was. The huge figure that stooped beside him had not been there only a moment since, and though from the huge, rough-shafted spear the man leaned upon he had the look of a warrior, no one in all the army wore such a long and dusty mantle of midnight blue, nor such a wide-brimmed hat. But even had Kermorven been a man of less swift thought, that chill would have warned him. "You!" he said, his words forming thick as blood upon his tongue with the wrath that welled up within him. "You, Raven! And well you are named, coming to settle upon a battlefield, and batten upon the fallen. May you fall in your turn, you callous crow of carrion, and drag down all your kind with you. Your kind that in their eternal squabbling trample unheeding upon the brief lives of men." He waved a furious hand at the devastation in the vale below. "Why could you not have prevented that, friend of man that you claim to be? Why could you not save him, at least, rather than come prate above him? What better have you wrought with all your endless wars? Your kind, or the ice kind, one power is as bad for mankind as another. Why will you twist and turn the world this way and that between you? A lasting curse upon the whole pack of you. Why will you not leave men be to live their own lives?" The figure turned its head, and he found himself staring into a single eye that gleamed bright as black waters beneath the shadows of the brim. The face in the shadows was lean, hook-nosed, seamed as an ancient oak, with lines that were a cryptic chart of long years of wisdom, and perhaps also of vast and joyous laughter. The rest was hidden beneath shaggy white hair and beard, but the eye was young and clear, that of a man in his vigorous prime, as he was himself. It surveyed him gravely, without anger, and with only the faintest tinge of mockery before it spoke. "That will come, and this day has hastened it. That is worth a higher price than is paid. Be content." Kermorven glared at him. "I may not be Elof to cross blades with the powers, but since he lies at death's door, I will at least have my say nonetheless. You despoiler of our— No! The commanding strength of the voice astonished him. But though it was deep and fair, it was not Raven's tone. Kermorven turned again, and though a man of courage, he found himself shaking uncontrollably. Elof stood before him, upright and straight upon his own strong legs, and though it obviously hurt his deep-burned face, he smiled. "I heard you, but folks such as I don't die so easily, old friend." Kermorven, limp with astonishment, looked back at the Raven. "You did come to help him? You saved him?" The white beard tossed. I did nothing. All that was done, he did. But if it is help you wish, I may spare you some, my Lord Karen, under my ancient bond with your folk and line, and because I am indebted to you for your work today, I give you advice, and it is this: begone from here at once, back to your ships with all your folk, and begone at once." "But Karis," said Kermorven angrily, "the unleashed waters threaten it, and all its folk. We must stay to succor them, at least, not only because they are our kindred, but all the more so." Raven growled impatiently. "You cannot aid them, nor should you try. Do you not see why? But you knew that a great change was impending, that once again the world hung in the balance. Surely you realized that such things cannot be avoided, that the balance cannot be stayed, only tipped one way or another. This way or that? Very well. The balance has been tipped the better way, away from the changeless ice, towards the side of life. You have had a hand in that. Why rail against it now? Did you not know that life means change? Constant change?" "No," said Kermorven dully. "I did not guess." "But why not?" The deep voice was rich, almost rejoicing. "Nothing endures forever unchanging. Not the stone beneath your feet, nor the stars above your head. Not men, and not powers. Everything changes. Everything shifts." His eye gleamed brightly, as if at some secret only he knew. Overhead the stars were coming out, and the pale ribbon of the river stretched across the heavens. "And why should it not? Would you have the river frozen and dead, as that one was below,
or the river flowing. For if it did not, how would anything ever reach the sea?
Silence lay across the shattered land. Even the thunder of the new forces below them seemed stilled for that time. The clouds were gathering fast, hiding the stars. The tall figure raised his spear.
In the end, there are only two choices. Call them what you will. Growth or decay. Life or death. A clear river or a stagnant pond. The fate of Karis is hard. None know that better than I, who have watched over it since its birth, and joined my blood to its royal line. But it was old as the lands and races of men are reckoned, long overdue to alter, one way or another. Yet so entrenched was it in its ways, that only some such disaster might bring that about. Its folk must forget what was theirs, and struggle to find something new in a new land, as their ancestors did, and yours also. Harsh, yes, but consider how much harder the other way would have been.
Grimorvan lowered his eyes. You are right. And I should not have spoken as I did. The gray head nodded, and the voice became softer. All things go their way appointed, and in their own time. But I should not blame you for not grasping that truth. Even I did not wholly, till Ilmarinen taught it to me. Greatest of the elder powers. Most of his fellows never learned it, least of all Taun. And Taunatar after him. Well, she knows it now, and she has paid a grievous price for her knowledge. For like all her rebel kind, she has resisted change longest of all. Yet now it has been forced upon her, and her loss is all the more grievous. She was trapped in her body with no chance to leave it, and so she is severed from her power, reduced as Taun was to a shadow of her former self. It will fade now, that power, and with it, the ice. That will be a change for the better, will it not? But since all things are linked in the world, each acting upon another, you must accept one change as part of many others. You cannot pick and choose. Kermorvan raised his head suddenly and stared in horror. He made as if to speak, reached out to seize the old man's mantle. Elof called out a warning, but faster even than his thought, the spear swung about in the gnarled hand, and the tip of the blade dug in beneath the point of Kermorvan's jaw. No more. Your duty is to your land. Linger here, and you will not live to fulfill it. The forces that were wielded today have flooded land and sky with poisons. My storm winds bear the worst of them northward to the ice, to speed the cleansing of what lurks there. But enough is left to put you all in peril. Kermorvan's mouth hardened with anger, and he pulled free of the insistent spear point. But without wasting time, he whirled about and shouted to the silent throng below the hill.
Captains, to me! Herald, sound! Form up the march! We're going home!
No other words could have aroused so thunderous a cheer from those weary throats, drowning even the thunderclap that burst overhead. But Kermorven did not stay to acknowledge it. He turned back at once, with a question hovering on his lips, and then stood staring. The figure of the raven had vanished.
"Did you see him go?"
he demanded of Ills and of Rock, but neither of them had.
"And you?"
Elof shrugged. "That's a dark mantle he wears. He seemed simply to merge with the dark." Kermorven looked at him strangely. "You had nothing much to say to each other, he and you. Yet it was to you he always came." Elof returned the look. "Everything he said was as true for me." Understanding widened Kermorven's eyes. "Of course. You have lost more to change. Far more. I grieved with you, my friend. I grieve now. Words will not serve me better." Rock grunted his agreement. He could not meet Elof's look as he took his hand, very gently, perhaps because of the burn. "You deserved better," he said softly, "after so long a struggle." From the shadows below the horns were sounding, summoning the army to the march. "Do you feel able to walk now? To ride?" Elof nodded. "I do. In body, at least. I am healing. For the rest?" His eyes seemed to lose their focus once more, to gaze into distances undreamt of. "That is harder to tell. But I will come with you. For now." A slow rain began to fall about them as they set off down the hill. The march to the sea was a silent one at first, but by the second day it became more triumphal in mood, as the true measure of their victory at last began to dawn upon the weary soldiers, and the promise of going home. Even the prospect of short commons and a long voyage could not dampen their joy, but they kept it muted out of respect for their king, and for the master smith who had wielded such awesome power at such cost to himself. But for the most part, both men rode in silence, and Kermorven most of all, to Ilse's deep concern. "Something troubles him. Something more than I can understand," she told Elof as they rode. "Do you know what it might be?" Elof looked at her and took her hand in his. "I cannot help, Ilse," was all he said. With the column marched the ravens and their many captives, whom Kermorven pardoned and proclaimed free. When they came to the coast and their landing, he offered them all their freedom and their ships to seek out their homeland. But to a man they declined. They were his followers and his people, and preferred to follow his fortunes if he would permit it. To this he agreed, since there was land enough and to spare in his eastern realm. And through them I may one day come to some peace with the Ekwesh settlers in the west," he added to his friends. "With the grip of the ice loosening upon them, they may become more reasonable. In time," he added, looking hard at Elof. "A wise hope, I think," was all Elof replied. It did not seem to satisfy the king. It was an exchange neither Ilse nor Rock understood. and it grieved them that there seemed to be some cause of tension between two such fast friends. But neither would give any clue as to what it might be, until the dawn when the fleet at last set sail. Last of all to weigh anchor was the Prince Corentin, and at its stern stood the king and his friends, looking back. As the great ship turned its head out into the bay, catching the freshening wind, Elof leaned back intently, as if listening to some remote sound. "I don't hear," began Rock, but Kermorven held up his hand, and together they listened. A moment later, Ilse looked around sharply. "It sounds like bells," she said, and bit her full lip. "I," said Rock uneasily, "couldn't make it out, but bells, it must be. From Karis." Kermorven nodded. "So it is. But they are swinging with the waves now. Soon the waters will ring the bells even in that great city, in those high towers I have never seen, save in my dreams. And where else, Master Smith? Where else?" Such was the anger in his voice that Ilse caught him by the arm. "He knows," said Kermorven softly, "what I was about to ask the Raven. He knows the question. He may even know the answer, but he will not tell me." He controlled himself with difficulty and stood up, very straight. "As your friend, I might have claim on your truthful answer, Master Smith. But as a king, you owe it to me." Elof ran his fingers through his whitened mane. He had never felt older or wearier than now. "You shall have it," he said. "But not now." "When, then?" demanded Kermorven tautly. "When I choose. But it will not be long delayed. That I promise you." The voyage back was by all accounts swift and sure, but to Kermorven it must not have seemed so. Nevertheless, it was clear to Elof that he was doing his best to be content with that promise, and be the friend he had always been, and that was what Elof most desired. He surrounded himself with his friends as much as he could, and this did not go unnoticed. "Almost as if you're savoring us," said Rock bluntly. "Storing us up so you won't forget. Not thinking of setting out on one more lunatic search, are you? Because lunatic it will be, I promise you. At your age, in your condition." Ilse put an arm around his shoulder. "If she remembers you still, she will do the searching. There is nobody now who can hold her back. Louhi will have problems of her own." Elof smiled, but it became a grimace of pain. "What I did to her? That may hold her back. Even at the last, I betrayed her, Ilse." "No," said Kermorven, pouring him a stoup of wine, made doubly precious by their short supplies. "Drink this, man, and take heart. I was there, I saw, and I will judge you, as is my right, as once before I declined to. You did what was inevitable, with no time for thought, and you were shielding me. If the old Kara is there, she will not forget that." "Maybe," said Elof quietly. "What you say may be true. But meanwhile, I am waiting for a sign. And though I am happy among you all, I grow weary. At long last there came a sunset when the mastheads hailed land on the horizon. That brought Kermorven and the others on deck, but to their surprise, they found Elof already there. He was huddled up by the steersman's bench against the cold night wind, and coughing. He looked up as the king approached. I said I would answer your question one day, Kermorven, and this is the day. Kermorven's face went gray, and he sat down heavily on the bench. I feared it might be. Visibly he gathered his strength. Tell me, then, and have done with it, what Louhi threatened me with, and I laughed away for the army's sake. It has haunted me all these days and nights since. I see it in my dreams even. Was it true? Yes, said Elof quietly. It was. It is. Ills and Rock stared down at him aghast, but he shook his head sadly. Think of it. Where did the waters come from that make up the great glaciers of the ice? From the seas, in the end, and their levels fell. New coastlines were laid bare. New land emerged, as other land was covered. And men took that land, because it was farthest from the ice, and because no other power held it in their dominion, as Tapaiao does the forests. The old kingdoms of men were crushed, and it was in coastal lands that their new realms sprang up, even those of the Ekwesh. Why was the Vale of Karis so deep, think you? Because once before, it was a sea, and waves broke over that smooth ridge where the gate was built. The Iskianis was all that remained of that sea. It only reclaims what was taken from it. He laughed till it turned to a coughing fit. Ironic, isn't it? Karis, Morvanik, Morven, Kerbrahane. Men settled those great realms to escape the ice. Men held them against it. Yet all the time they were the ice's own creation, as unnatural in the world as it was. And now Taunatar is weakened. The others of her kind will not be able to sustain it. It has ceased its advance. Slowly it will melt and withdraw, and the oceans will reclaim their own. How soon? Demanded Rock in horror. How soon? Are you telling us we've no home left awaiting us over the horizon there? Was that why you waited? Elof smiled and lifted a hand. From overhead came a joyous cry. Morvenhall in sight! Morvenhall to starboard! Talus and tower! Home! We're home! That, at least I can spare you, he said. It comforts me somewhat. And you did not notice the glaciers shrinking before we sailed, did you? They almost made themselves the ruling forces in the climes of the world. And such a presence will be slow to disperse. It will take time. Many lifetimes of men, I think. But not so many. 3, 4, 5 perhaps, before the waters begin to swallow the coasts. But after that, it will become swift. New lands will be laid bare when the glaciers melt, said Ills encouragingly, as they were before. That's something, isn't it? Kermorven did not lift his head when he spoke. As I feared. That cannot be enough time to find and clear enough new land, even if the powers that linger will let us. And the lands that were under the ice will take longer still to recover. Oh, we will manage something, somehow, with your folk to help us. Men will endure, but not their realms. We will dwindle, as did your folk, or revert to simple, rustic folk, even savages and barbarians. It happens even now to Karis, but soon we also shall be devoured. He stood suddenly, and his face was bitter and bleak, his fists clenched white at his breast. So ends my fool's dream. My dream of founding a realm and a dynasty, a land of prosperity and wisdom, of strength and justice. Not one that would last forever. I needed no raven to tell me that. But that would last as long as Karis, and leave as great a name? Or, at the least, some tangible mark and memory in the hearts of men. But whatever I achieve still, it will melt and vanish, and be dissolved in the eternal changes of the sea. I should have known better, this world being what it is. It was all in vain. Elof also rose, though with difficulty. No, he said quietly, and put a hard hand on Kermorvan's shoulder. It was not, and it will not be. The tall man turned, his bronze hair streaming in the breeze with the look in his face of one who hears a distant horn call. It will not be, repeated Elof. I did you an injustice, my old friend. You spoke still of the future, of what you might still achieve, hopeless or not. Had I been sure you would, I would have answered you sooner, and not delayed till I had to. Hear then and hope on. Without your kingship, without you, there would have been no victory, no chance of any men at all surviving, civilized or not. But they will, now. Civilization will come again, where without you, without all of you, it could not have. It will come again, because from the fires you light in the years to come, small sparks will be kept alight, little enclaves of wisdom in a world newborn, and ignorant of all things newborn are. Some of their knowledge, some of their wisdom, that will survive to pass down the years, even if men forget whence it came, and keep only a dim memory of legend, of an age of vanished glory. All save that memory may be lost, yet still it will inspire them to glories of their own. Your name, all our names, they may forget, but the image of your kingdom, your line, shall burn bright in their hearts. They will cross seas in quest of it once more, and perhaps the name of Karis, of the glorious city of wise, will not be wholly forgotten. Men may hear its bells ringing still, there beneath the waves. You shall have your dynasty, Cairn Kermorvan, and no king ever founded one greater. It shall be all mankind. When Kermorvan spoke at last, it was with difficulty. It is greater than I deserve, then. I am comforted, and I am humbled. I can hope still. May our children and theirs be worthier. My Lady Ills? She smiled then, But she also could not speak. It was Rock who spoke first. That goes for me also. But Elof, I don't know if I should ask, but how can you be so bloody sure? And you said you had to tell now, whispered Ills. Why, Elof? Why? Kermorven nodded. I wonder also. Yet I do not doubt you. What sight is given you, Elof Valentor? Elof smiled again, though a cough racked him painfully. The sight of the bird that breaks its shell. As a bird indeed I saw it first, blown this way and that on the heights. A light shone all about me, it seemed, and only my own poor self was in the way of it. As Louhi said, we do not die so easily, our kind. But Kara was right to sense a change coming. It was for us both. Who are you? Kermorven whispered. I have asked you that before, but who are you? A man, like yourself, answered Elof, with only a tinge of amusement. Exceptional in some ways, perhaps. But then, all men are, if only they can discover how. I live by eating and drinking. I grow ill. I feel pain. I bleed. Age comes upon me. What more would you have? I have smithcraft in me, but then so do all men in whom the blood of the powers is still mingled richly enough. Yourself included, Kermorven. But he hesitated. Once I was something more. No, more than once. What in Hella's curlies are you talking about? Demanded Rock. Elof grinned. In no place so arcane. Bear with me. It is hard to explain. There is still so much that I can't remember, or only have a brief glimpse of. More than my mind will hold. Say, if you like, that I have lived many lives. Stay! So commanding was the word, so absolute the gesture, that instead of springing up in astonishment or fear, they swayed towards him and were silent. Or that someone has, each one different, none of them resulting in the man who speaks to you now. How could they, when so many different memories must make up a man? Yet each one began from a common core. Each was a different path to an end, and that core endured. Most were failures, but I am not. He grimaced. Not entirely, not at the last. For if I learned one thing in all those lifetimes, learned it with pain and suffering and damnable follies, it was this. He coughed, so that his whole body shook. That only a man free of the powers could free men from them. He smiled again. As free they must become in the end, Kermorven, however great the cost. So I forswore all that was mine, knowledge and power beyond your comprehension, and now beyond mine. Forswore it wholly, as I had never before dared do so. On that path, there was no going back. I forgot entirely who I had been. When I became the infant foundling they named Alv, I set myself forever within the limits of men. And you chose Assenby, murmured Kermorven, as if in a dream, where a scepter was being used as a cattle goad. A scepter that would draw me through my great smithcraft to its rightful lord, in the end, said Elof, and became aware of a vast laughter bubbling up within him, and where an agent of Lohi would come, drawn in his turn, though neither of us ever guessed it. Only I had reckoned without the raven. He knew of me, none better. No other did. Not Tapaiao, not even Lohi, though she saw something in me she did not understand. Raven chose to shorten my ways somewhat, in his own twisted fashion, but never freely. I had always to earn his help, however paltry. Of my own, I had nothing, save one legacy left myself against great need, and that was the sword Talanthar, which I renamed Gorthar, and the knowledge that lay bound up in it. And both of those I had to find anew for myself. Vade's sword, said Rock quietly, as they knew in Karis, and you were drawn to Vade's forge. So it was Vade you were, right enough. Vade was himself, and for what he was when he perished in the great marshes, though nobly enough at the last. Poor creature. He knew too much of what he was, and not enough of men, and both were torment to him. He failed, though not completely. Him you might have feared, for he was more than a man, but I, he laid his hands in his lap, I am a man. All my life, that is what I have thought myself. And now that I know my history, I feel only the more sure of it. I'm afraid that you might think otherwise, that you, my oldest friends, might not accept me as you always have. He smiled wryly. Whatever my human failings. No one answered at first, and the sound of the waves grew very loud in their ears. But then, impulsively, Ills caught his hand and held it tight. Ass! Of course you're a man! Does it take a Duergar girl to tell you that? Well, said Rock thoughtfully, you look like the same lad I've chased around, and about half this world with. And I reckon nobody but a man could get in some of the scrapes I've hauled you out of. He chuckled. Or haul me out of mine. So we'll give you the benefit of the doubt, Kermorven? I think that might be arranged, said Kermorven dryly, though a great wonder was still in his eyes. Indeed, I have known you too well, too long to think otherwise, and I have always thought it an honor, even then. Yet. But there he caught himself and said no more. There Ill snorted. There he goes again. Too damned courteous. Elof, you are who you are, and you're a fool to think we'd have you otherwise. After the first surprise, that is. But once you were someone else, you've told us. Someone apart from those other lives. Have you remembered who? Elof laughed suddenly, and felt a coughing so hard, his hand clenched tight upon hers. I'm sorry. My chest seems afire. I was only remembering you and I, Morven, in the earliest days arguing about what your Kerbrahane philosophers thought, about whether the powers could take human shape, and why, whether it was to understand men better. I wish they could have met Lohi. It is not the shape that gives understanding, but the life. As I was, I never understood the hearts of men. I longed to. So at last I plucked up the courage and made what I thought a great sacrifice. Frighteningly great. Freely, I forgot all of myself, leaving only the essence, the inner fire. And fire it was indeed. For the light and fire that gave life to the world, they were my element once, as the waters were Nairads and Saethanas, and the forests Tapaiaus, as the airs were Tionatars and Tiones once, till they armored themselves in the dead ice. We were the minds that roved in the forces, set within them to the long labors of shaping a world, destined in the end to change and become a part of it, to join with men. We take human shape more easily than any other, because that is the shape we must all take in the end, and the destiny we must share. Lohi may, soon, and I wish her joy of it, ill-prepared as she is, though she will still have something of her beauty to help her. I embraced that change, because I knew it must come, and oddly enough, I feel more myself than ever before, for I was Ilmarinen, forger of mountains, smith of the powers, and I am all of him that remains. Ilmarinen, gasped Ills, and would have sunk down at his feet, had he not caught her and raised her, though she shivered at his touch. Small wonder that Elof smiled. Saw something in me? It is so, and it is not out of place. For in his way, Ilmarinen always loved your race as much as they him. But I would rather be your friend still than what he has been to you, for I share your world, not his, save only in this. We who have dwelt upon the heights, we cannot enjoy the surcease of a single life, a single death. It may be that men cannot either. Of the knowledge only a glimmering remains. But this I know, we at least may rest between our human lives, may find long surcease from our labors. I have earned it, and perhaps more. For when I took courage at last, and embraced that change, I found something new rewarded me, something I had never managed to find before. And if it is lost to me as a man, then by pursuing that change, I may find it yet. You asked me, Ills, why I had to tell you now. It is this. I was waiting for a sign, and that sign has come. He stood, and they stood with him. It is time to say farewell, my friends, but not forever. I will never be far from you, in this life or any other. For harsh as the world may seem, yet against all hope, we may make things of worth endure. Even that most fragile thing of all, that we call love. For see there. The voice was a man's, but such a weight even of remembered power resounded within it that, as the tale is told, No man on board could look anywhere but where his lifted arm pointed. High above the coasts of Morvenhall, where red stone and white tower gleamed in distant harmony, a dark speck appeared, flying swift against the wind that bore them home. And it seemed to those who had been the friends of Elof Valantor, greatest of all master smiths among men, that for a moment that wind blew strong and fierce and warm all about them, as if great wings beat within. And when they turned to Elof, the deck was empty where he had stood. Only a few fragments of silver lay there, and an arm ring of pale gold, abandoned as things childish are when their need and use is past. No man heeded them, for their eyes were held skyward, higher and ever higher, to where two great swans flew up, circling ever closer in a graceful spiral until they seemed to vanish among the clouds into the last rich light of the sun. And though to them it set, the watchers knew in their hearts that elsewhere it arose again in spreading, undying fire.